Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. All things Middle Earth here with a video looking at the commander Ugthak. In just a moment, we're going to look at every single aspect of this character's kit. So regardless of what respect level you have him at, regardless of what items you have, regardless of what troops you have available, I'm going to show you how to get the best potential out of this character. So stay tuned. Okay, so as I have talked about in my previous commander video with Eowyn, which I'll link up in the top right if you're curious about that one, I have sort of changed the structure of how I'm looking at commanders because I realize sometimes providing the most ideal build for a commander is not helpful to everyone. If you just full pulled a commander, you want to know how to use him where you got him. You can't be told, well, you got to have him at respect 5. So I'm going to show a couple of different builds, so hopefully regardless of where you have this commander, you can get some use out of him. And obviously, as you can see, I only have my Ugthak at respect 2. I don't currently have items on him right now. And so the way that I'm able to have good information for Ugthak to provide clear information to you is through our Discord, which is linked down below. And in that Discord, we have these commander conversations, sometimes for a week at a time, where everyone provides their feedback so we can get a really good feel for how these commanders work, how their different builds rank, you know, which one is better to use, and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you want to join the Discord and join those conversations, that's linked down below. And the spreadsheet that I'm going to be referencing is linked down below as well. Now, looking at the spreadsheet, it could be a little confusing if you've not seen this before, but it's broken up into a few levels. First is the tier level, where we look at the different skills, and this one we're going to be looking at the R5 build and the R0 build. The first one being a troop buff, troop enhancing build, the second one being a commander damage build where Ugthak is doing the damage himself. Then we have our gear, our ideal gear right here. Then we have our ideal troops, and then we have factions that the commander will benefit the most from. So we've got these things split into 4 levels, and I'm going to walk through them with you. And these numbers here are in priority order of what you should skill. So if you're just looking at it, you want to know what to go for first, do the 1 first, then 2, and so on. If there is an asterisk next to the number, that means it's tied with something else because there wasn't really a clear winner. And so you could go in either of those orders and you'd be just fine. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to look at the R5 build first, which is going to be his Uruk-hai or troop boosting build. So the first thing you don't want to go into is the Uruk-hai elite skill. This is going to give the commander extra might and speed with a speed plus 15 at the max level effect. You're going to follow that up by going into Uruk-hai Captain, which is going to be a 35% of recovering HP after dealing damage. Then you're going to want to go into Dangerous Trade, which is going to be a dangerous trade. Quite literally, you're going to receive more damage, but deal more damage. Fourth in that order, you're going to want to go into a Warlord, which is going to give extra damage to Orcs and Uruk-hai, and a Might 15 for the max level effect. And then lastly, you're going to want to go into Orcish Warlord, assuming you're using Orcs in your build. If you're running completely Uruk-hai, this one does not become as important, which means if you're only running Uruk-hai, you're going to be able to complete this build a little bit sooner in terms of the level of Ugthak. If you decide you want to run all Uruk-hai and you have extra points, then you can just start going into the skills down here, Pursuer or Searing Axe, depending on what you prefer, and you'll kind of have an idea of which ones to go in for that once we talk about that specific build where we're looking at the R0 build. But again, the R5 Respect 5 build, you're going to go into Uruk-hai Elite first, second Uruk-hai Captain, third Dangerous Trade, fourth Warlord, and fifth Orcish Warlord if you're using Orcs in your army composition. Based on discussion in our Discord, we are ranking this R5 troop damage build a solid B. It's kind of right in the middle. So from S through D tier, we're putting him right in the middle there. Again, I had some people saying he was worse, some people he was saying better. So we kind of split the difference. And I'd love to hear what your feedback is on this build, if you've had some use with it in your experience. But it seems like he's kind of just sitting middle of the rung. He may not be the favorite for tier 1 commanders, but it's okay. It's solid. You can get some use out of him, especially with some good troops with him. Okay, next we're going to be looking at the commander damage build, which is going to be favored over the troop damage build by just a little bit. We went ahead and put the commander damage build at a B+. The reason for that being, it doesn't matter what troops you use with the commander damage build. So it's not as dependent on what faction you're playing as, what troops you have first. If you have gold to upgrade your troops, you also don't have to worry as much. Since you don't have to use any specific troop type, you can kind of shuffle around and use all of your troops. So you don't have to wait for specific troops to finish. So I think some of those things in mind just make this build a little bit better, especially being that it is more accessible at a lower level. So looking at the spreadsheet here, I have a tie for Pursuer and for Searing Axe. So you're either going to go into Searing Axe followed by Scorch, And Brawler is kind of situational depending on if you're going up against melee, so I didn't include it. Obviously, if you do some scouting on a 200 power tile and you see they got a lot of melee troops, feel free to throw into Brawler, but I'm not including it in the priority list here. So it's either going to be Searing Axe followed by Scorch, or Pursuer followed by Overwhelm and then Deepen Wounds. Now, we did some testing to figure out which one of these is better than the others, and it seemed like it really did not make a huge difference. Obviously, if you're going up against a commander like Dwalin or Ori, who can take less fire damage or burn damage, then Searing Axe may not be as good. So if you know who you're going up against, maybe go into Pursuer first, but ideally this build is going to be best used if you go into both Searing Axe and Pursuer. Again, you have on the list tied for first for the Searing Axe and Pursuer, followed by their adjacent skills. And so whichever one you don't go into first, you're going to go into that one. So if you go into Searing Axe, then Scorch, then third for you would be Pursuer, followed by Overwhelm and Deepen Wounds. Or if you go into Pursuer, followed by Overwhelm and Deepen Wounds, your fourth and fifth options are going to be Searing Axe, followed by Scorch. And again, if you have the extra points, you can go into Brawler. It's not a bad skill. It's just really situational. So if you end up going up against mostly ranged troops, this is not going to get as much effect. But if you go up against a full army of melee troops, then this is going to be really nice. So maybe if you want to do some scouting on high power tiles, you could consider going into that. But we're just going to recommend Searing Axe with Scorch in this part of the tree. And again, compare these two builds compared next to each other, looking at the Pursuer Searing Axe or the Uruk-hai Elite kind of R5 build. We are going to give the edge to the R0 commander damage build. I think there are just a few reasons that make it better, but they're both pretty close. So if you enjoy running with Uruk-hai and running your commanders with troops to increase the troop usage, you're not going to really see a crazy difference, at least from what we were talking about. But I think the commander damage is going to be just slightly above the troop damage build here. Next up, we're going to look at the ideal gear for Ugthak. So as you see here, it's anything with a focus on might, and then effect on items can vary depending on the build you're using. So again, looking at Ugthak, he is a very might heavy commander. The focus and speed are not amazing on him. So we're just going to try and get his might as high as we possibly can. So anything that increases might. And then for effects, you want to look for in terms of the abilities that your items have, you want to, depending on what skill. So if you're running the Uruk-hai troop buff, you want to run items that give increased damage or reduced damage to Uruk-hai or orcs. Or if you're using primarily melee, look at melee, whatever build you're using. And if you're using the commander damage build, then look for effects that have to do with Ugthak dealing damage. So I'm going to give you a few examples here. Number one for Ugthak is going to be something like the Uruk-hai broadsword. This is going to give might to Ugthak. It's going to give HP to Uruk-hai and orcs, which is, again, it's not going to be a bad thing even if you're running the commander damage build. And then this ability here is for orcs, so it may not be the best one here, but you want to look through and see, depending on what build you're using, if you end up using orc strength to be fine, but something like Blaze might be better if you're running the Ugthak commander damage build, because this is after the commander attacks against the enemy target, deal an additional 5.6% burn damage modified by the focus stat, which isn't super high, but again, it's going to add on top of what he's already doing. Same thing, Pierce could be a solid one as well, where it's going to deal an additional 13.3% physical damage starting out. But the Uruk-hai broadsword is going to be a great option for an item there. Another hand weapon could be something like the battle axe here. It's completely might based, and something like the melee might could be great if you're running the commander damage build. And there are also other options like Flay, where in the first 4 rounds, the allied commander is going to ignore some of the target's defense. So again, hopefully you get the idea. If we go over to the items really quick, looking at the battle axe, for example, there are some items that like Flay here at the top that focus more on the commander, and there are some things like melee might which focus more on the troops. So depending on your build, troops or commander, pick abilities that go with that. For the most part, there's nothing that's going to be game breaking either way in terms of effects for weapons for him. One last suggestion that I'm going to do for Ugthak is going to be the Axe of Khazad-dûm. Now, I don't actually have this on my evil account. I have one on my good account though, and I was looking at it. And again, it's just a full might weapon. And again, when you're looking at the effects, just look at either troop damage or commander damage, depending on what build you're running. And if you have a lot of really good items that maybe increase the damage dealt by your troops or the damage taken by your troops, or decrease the damage taken by your troops, that might make make that troop build a little bit more viable for you if you have items that really increase that. So that's where I think it could help you make the decision, assuming you have him at R5 and you're choosing between the two. If you're playing as Isengard and you have the tier 4 Isengard units, you've got a lot of Uruk-hai, and you have a lot of good items that increase the Uruk-hai's damage, then that build might become more viable for you. But again, they're pretty closely matched, so I would just go with what you have. Now, again, I'm not going to go through every single item that I have here, but as you see on the list, I have them color-coded as purple or gold. Again, we're just looking at things that give might. Army defense isn't bad. Shroud wouldn't be a bad thing. You could look at the Warborn battle plate, which is going to give might. It's going to give defense and speed for melee units. You could look at the Berserker's Remnant, which is going to give might and HP, army HP for Uruk-hai. Honestly, this is probably the better one in terms of if you want the best armor for him. But again, the thing that I hope you're not missing is that we're looking at these and seeing if they have might. If they do, we're pretty much going for it. So that's the armor. For the head, we're going to look at things like the Cask of Pride that give might. We can look at the Berserker's Gaze. There's also the full helm, kind of the Gondorian looking helm. That's also a full might build. So again, looking at those and seeing if you have some that line up with whatever build you're running. And then lastly, for the accessories for Ugthak, they're a little bit more difficult because there aren't that many accessories that focus solely on might. Let me make sure I have Ugthak selected so we can actually see what items he's able to use, because different items aren't usable with everyone. So you could look at something like these, the worn out smoking pipe. Now the focus isn't something we're going to really worry about here. You're looking at sustain, especially if you have one that's refined a bit and have a pretty high recovery here. The sustain could be a solid one on the worn out smoking pipe. You could also look at the drums of Moria, which do give some might, and then the golden version, the drums of Barad-dûr, could also be a good option, which again you can see have might, focus, and army attack for melee units. So again, those are just a few examples, but I feel like it's very situational. Obviously, if you're a crazy huge whale and you've got like just everything in the game, you're going to be able to go through all your gold items and pick out the best ones. But truth be told, if I can be honest about Ugthak, if you are a whale, you probably are going to have better commander options. I'm not saying he's terrible, but if you're a whale and have all the gold gear at your at your expense, you're probably going to have some commanders that are going to be a little bit better than Ugthak to use. So again, I'm showing these examples, so if that's all you have, if you got lucky and you pulled a gold item like this, then awesome, use that on him. But again, you can also look at your blue items, looking at things like the Uruk-hai Pike, which are going to give might, and it's going to give increased damage to Uruk-hai. Also, the new update that's starting tonight as time of recording this is actually going to make some of the blue items better. So we might even see that blue items are going to take a lot better priority over gold and purple, because they can, I think, be strengthened and refined even further than they've been able to before. So again, just focus on might and focus on effects that go with the build for your commander. Now, looking at troops for Ugthak, I'm going to make this pretty simple. So if you're running the troop damage build, obviously you want to run Uruk-hai and you want to run orcs. So there's no real perfect recipe here. I like the snipers because they have the bullseye and the full protection. So they're just kind of an annoying unit in general. So the snipers, I think, are the best ranged troop for evil. And so the fact that they're Uruk-hai is kind of nice. So if you can get the snipers, that's fantastic. And then any combination of the alchemists or the berserkers. So if I was running this, I would probably run a combination of berserkers, alchemists, and snipers. I think that'd be like the ideal troop build for him, looking at just Uruk-hai. Obviously, if you want to look at orcs, which are not going to get all the benefits the Uruk-hai get, but also with the orcish warlord, there are some okay options. You could look at things like the raiders, they would be solid, or something like the reaper that is going to get the bonuses from his R5 build. But we're primarily looking at Uruk-hai, so that's what I would say for that. If you're running the commander damage build, I would definitely look to stick more on the survivability sides of things, since Ugthak dealing damage is the most important thing, and I think having troops that are a little bit more survivable is just going to allow him to do more damage and hopefully get you less losses in these battles. So again, I would honestly go with a similar build, looking at maybe a little bit more tanky unit like the berserker and the sniper that have the anti-melee and kind of anti-ranged there. So I think, again, looking at Uruk-hai, if you're starting out and you only have tier 1 or 2, that's fine. You can make use with those, but obviously he's going to be best used with a tier 3 units for him. And if you want to know what faction is Ugthak best used with, well, it's going to be Isengard. Now, I don't think this is going to make a huge difference, but obviously if you run Isengard and you have him at R5, you're going to have all the Isengard Uruk-hai available first. You are going to have the Snagathrak as a choice for another Uruk-hai unit to use with him. And so I think that's going to be fine. Also, if you're playing in Season 2 onward, we have the regional buffs on the map. On this one I'm looking at now, I don't have those yet. But playing as Isengard, which has been kind of wiped off of this map, you're going to get bonuses from different areas that are around Isengard for Uruk-hai. And so you're going to have a slight edge as Isengard, but again, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. If you want to play as Mordor, if you want to play as Angmar, you're going to still have access eventually to those troops. It just depends on what build you're ready to run. But again, if you are running the commander damage build, then it definitely does not matter as much. Just use whatever, the tankiest troops you have. If you're playing as Rune, you could just play with the Dragoon and the Corsairs, and that would be fine. So again, it doesn't matter a ton what faction you start as, but there's probably going to be a little bit of an edge with the Isengard starting. Again, it doesn't matter that much what faction you start as, but I think you might get a slight edge if you start as Isengard based on what troops they have and the regional bonuses they get on the map. But that is going to do it for our video on Ugthak. Again, there are two different builds. They're very closely matched, but I wanted to make sure to cover this commander because I think since he is a starting commander, there's a lot of people that are wondering about him. So you can either run the commander damage build or the troop damage build. Both are solid, and as we talked about with items, you're going to want to focus on might as much as you can and effects that boost whichever build you are running for him. So that's going to do it for me in this video. Again, if you want to join our Discord and join the conversations we're having over there, that's linked down below. So feel free to join us over there and join us for future conversations on commanders if you have some expertise you want to share with us. But hope you have a good one, and I'll see you in a future video.